The platform you've landed on is called Chakas. We are looking at gaps in dance historiographies and contemporary dance practices. My name is Sarah Berg, and together with beautiful and wonderful Sandra Chatterjee and Ari Jacobi, it is our great pleasure that you followed our invitation, maybe once again, or for the first time. And I say hello just briefly to our wonderful round of experts and guests, Christina, Nicole, Anna, Eike, Hari, and Franz Anton. Of course, you'll all be presented officially later on. So the platform you've landed on is called Chakas, that dancer, choreographer, and researcher Sandra Chatterjee and I, cultural and political educator and curator, initiated about 1.5 to 2 years ago now. And dance pedagogue Ari Jacobi is now with us for a while, and she's assisting us bravely to make Chakas happen and growing. So Chakas comes with the subtitle of Moving Interventions, and this is what we intend to do. We want to facilitate spaces in which perspectives can be negotiated in and through dance, bodies, and physical cultures. And our perspectives combine a lot of, for a longer time, unheard, unseen, underrepresented POC, post-migrant, decolonizing, critical intersectional, anti-racist, and critically white perspectives. Yes, indeed, they've been ignored for too long. Now, you could say, maybe we all feel it, they rise finally and hit in the streets and move on forward in different corners, crawl in institutional settings, and hopefully in large structures. So I guess it's exciting to observe what is growing simultaneously, globally you could say, but of course, a mainstream is still fighting back and holding on strongly, not to lose what has been a solid, let's just put one adjective on the table, post-colonial truth. So, well, I guess it makes sense not to spend too much energy on upholding, but maybe joining the learning circle, where different, diverse, and resilient minds and bodies contribute. So let's sit down, share some tea, coffee, or whatever you have prepared for yourselves, and have a talk. So a lot of things and events took space or happened, and Chakas, maybe Sandra, you give just a short insight what we've been doing over the past months and what we're still intending to do together with you. Yeah, so I'm just handing over. At the moment, you're on my left side.
Sorry, I'm still letting people in, so I was a little bit distracted. But yeah, welcome also from my side. Thanks all for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panel, to our wonderful guests for being here. I want to just add on to what Sada was saying. Briefly, we were very, very lucky to have had the chance to, letting people in, to have had the chance to have at least a modified version of this event, Forgotten Dancers, Forgotten Archives. Now with part 2, we had the mini symposium in May as part 1, and now we are having the sort of more free-flowing discussion with the same group of people, and hope that we can meet next year in person if possible, and have part 3 of the event live. Other than that, we really had to sort of this year switch gears and do more online work or team internal work. We started 2 sort of new projects out of that, which we were not planned. One is a sort of mapping of Munich dance stories or dance histories, where we want to really look at how do people dance in Munich, and really broadly, who dances in Munich, how, what, for how long, popular, professional, as part of, you know, migrant culture traditions, in nightclubs, anything. So we are in the planning stages of that. We did part one, just mapping our own dance histories in Munich and places. Yeah, so that is, in German, it's called Münchner Tanzgeschichten. So that will probably turn out, was born out of this. I mean, the idea has transformed into something much larger now, and probably will be a more long-term project. And we are about to launch our virtual think tank, which we have tried to create because we wanted to collect material and content on our website based on the events, which we couldn't do. So because we couldn't do events, we decided to do a virtual version of the think tank, which we'll be launching next month. But just this much for Chakras now. Sarah, if you want to just take over for a minute before I introduce everybody, just so that I can make sure that everybody for now is in case. You're muted.
Sorry, again and again. Huh? So we have like a wonderful part of about 17 up to 20 people right now. Welcome to all of you. Wonderful that you are interested in what we are doing. Like Sandra already told you, there are a lot of different things that what we are planning and doing here at the moment. Yes, it's not that easy to transform or transport everything what we've planned, of course, lively now on the screen, but in May already it showed us that it makes sense, of course, with the perspectives that we have and the question that we want to ask, to invite a global crowd, of course. So I guess at the moment we'll have the task to think back again how we can, together with a crowd that comes in and share from every corner, how we can put it back to a local Munich base, but with the Munich dance stories, as Sandra already put it, die Münchner Tanzgeschichten, we would like to map Munich on a dance, the dance scene here in Munich. And I guess then it, of course, makes sense if we meet people, find them, see where they've been hiding maybe, or working, or having their spaces. And then, of course, asking them questions and interviewing them. So we've been a little surprised, to be honest with you, that there is support and financing for this Münchner Tanzgeschichten, and this just put us on another the plan was changed in a way. So now we are going very local, but won't be forgetting, of course, our questions that we will be discussing with you tonight, because it's always this question of, the old question of acting locally and having a global mind. And this is what the stressful times maybe take from us. But of course, we with Chakras won't forget that also on a very local setting, we will be our work, because what is important for us and what is a question for us still is, you are guests from everywhere now. Where are the people from Munich? So we have to still get a little bit more connected to our Munich neighbors. And this is what Chakras hopefully will do and will be successful in 21, when it's not so much a pandemic situation, hopefully. Yeah. So maybe we say hello to all of our guests and present you so that you know who is here and who's once again followed our invitation.
Great. So I take over from here. I think I checked because there was some questions about links, etc., etc. So I'm sorry. It always does take a moment or two to get everybody accommodated on Zoom. But now we are ready to get started, and I would love to make a quick round of introductions, along with asking each of our panel guests to briefly just open the playing field from which direction we and they, from their work, are coming to this question of forgotten dances, forgotten archives, to start us off before we go into a more free-flowing discussion. So I'm really, really happy to first introduce Hari Krishnan, who is the chair and professor of dance at Wesleyan University. And he's in the university's departments of dance and in feminist gender sexuality studies. And he's also the artistic director of the Toronto-based dance company InDance. And his scholarship and artistic practice intersect dance, critical histories, and social justice issues. And in 2019, he published a book called Cellulite Classicism, Early Tamil Cinema and the Making of Modern Bharatanatyam, which was published in 2019. And yeah, congratulations, it recently received the De La Torre Bueno first special citation, which was announced by the DSA just last week. So congratulations for that. And so you were previously starting to talking about, I'll start with the question of forgotten archives, because that relates directly to your book, and would love to ask you to say a few words about that.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Again, it's very, it's very important, not just as a dance historian, but also when you talk about forgotten archives and forgotten practices, one must always keep in mind themes of forgotten politics and socio-political ways of embodying dance history in really meaningful ways, and the lessons learned and how we can merge that in really complex ways in terms of contemporary ways of thinking and contemporary art practice. In our previous session, I discussed a kind of a overview of my book, discussing the forgotten archives of film and cinema as an important artifact which was lost in the popular interpretation of dance history in South India, particularly the modern history of Bharatanatyam, which was always about the temple court proscenium stage trajectory, and film, which played such a central feature in the representation of historical dancing, particularly dance from the courtesan community, was always not mentioned in the popular reimagining. So I decided to write a book about that, and that's a result of celluloid classicism. Just briefly, because I was the brief to us is to be as short as possible. In my presentation, I offered a new methodology, interocularity, where we discuss the idea of dance history and film, not just through the aesthetic representation, but through multiple layers of historical artifacts, playbill, posters, press reviews, publicity blurbs, interviews, the actual dances themselves. So not looking at a single entity through a kind of a monolithic perspective, but the idea of interocularity, looking at it from multiple dimensions so that we can garner really complex meaning in terms of what we are seeing, and not using one particular historical artifact as a kind of truth serum, but rather looking at that a particular historical artifact in collaboration with multiple historical artifacts to glean and to discuss more complex representations of embodied practice and dance history.
Thank you so much, Hari, for this really compact recap of your argument and presentation from last time to get us started. And though, as is already clear from what you said, that one can't really separate forgotten archives and forgotten dancers, I will now introduce the next project or the next group, which focuses more on the question of forgotten dancers, though, like I said, it cannot be separated. And I'm really happy to introduce a research team, which I'm actually in my other life also part of, like in my university life. And it's a project called Border Dancing Across Time, which is conducted at the University of Salzburg, and it's funded by the Austrian Science Fund. And so I want to introduce Nicole Heitzinger and Franz Anton Kramer and Christina Gillinger from the project team. And I would introduce each of them and ask them in turn to introduce the forgotten dancers we are researching. So I start with Franz Anton Kramer. He's researcher in the Cluster of Excellence, Understanding Written Artifacts at Hamburg University. He works there for the principal investigator, Professor Gabriele Klein's project, Choreographies of Archiving. And he was part of the project team of Border Dancing Across Time until March 2020. And he also is the editor of the e-journal Map Media Archive Performance, together with Barbara Büscher. And Nicole Heitzinger is professor at the Department of Art History, Musicology, and Dance Studies at the University of Salzburg. And since 2019, she is also the scientific director of the doctoral program Science and Art of the Mozarteum and Paris-Lodron University in Salzburg. And she's the co-convener of the university course Curating in the Performing Arts. And Christina Gillinger-Courier-Vivart is also part of the project as a PhD researcher. And she's been working at Tanzquartier Wien since 2002 as a producer, curator, art mediator. And since 2017, she is in charge of the library and editor of the Tanzquartier Wien magazine. And she's also a lecturer at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Okay, so sorry, still people are coming. Great, if you would like to take over and briefly introduce the forgotten dancers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandra. In a double way, thank you for having organized this meeting and also for the collaboration we have had in the last years, in fact, on the project you just mentioned, Border Dancing Across Time, which has the subtitle, The Forgotten Parisian Choreographer, Nyota Nyoka, Her Oeuvre and Questions of Choreographing Créolité. So it's a rather complex project in whose center, however, I can maybe just very briefly say that it's as we said, the Parisian choreographer and dancer and performer Nyota Nyoka. She was living from 1896 to 1971, and in fact forgotten especially because she has really been a very prominent figure in the interwar cultural milieu in France, but also beyond. And one of the questions we are trying to tackle within the project is how come that after the war she was really forgotten, in the sense that she does not appear really in dance history manuals. She's not part of the canon, etc., etc. So quite a broad range of questions, which have to do, of course, with her identity construction, which also draws on ethnic aspects. She claimed to be an Indian dancer, but we are pretty sure that she's never been to India and that she never really engaged in Indian dance technique. But it was a frame of reference she constructed, and so it's quite a lot of work to unearth elements of her archives, which are preserved to a rather large extent. But the interesting thing is, for me as an archival research, as the four of us who are working on the project, we have various, let's say, strands of expertise and focus. And it's the first time I see an archive which is so extensive as hers, and at the same time does not tell so many things. So that's also something that I think leads us, at least leads me, to reconsider the very notion of archive as the, let's say, depository for truth, or elements, artifacts, documents, testimonies that lead to a truthful reconstruction of her life, which we are still, after 1.5 years, no, let's say after 1 year of research, we are still somehow at the beginning, and that's a very intriguing situation. We also have the question of the authorial position she's working from. That's more the question Sandra is concerned with, and also the notion of créolité, so of a kind of composite, hybrid, whatever, vision of an oeuvre, of a person's, an artist's life, rather than the traditional, let's say, aesthetic, technical, school building, etc., perspective on dance research.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge that actually one other team member of our team is here also, Berenike. She's also part of the research team, and she joined after actually the last symposium. So she wasn't initially in the presentations.
Right. I'm sorry to forget you.
No, I also didn't. And I must say it because, yeah, it was a different setup when we did the first symposium, and Berenike joined since then. But there's 2 more sort of dancers that emerge from the sort of context of Nyota and Yoka, which I would Christina will briefly introduce.
Yes, thank you also Sarah and Sandra and Franz Anton for starting introducing the project. So I joined the team, and I joined the whole universe of Nyota in Yoka, and reading and examining Nyota's life and oeuvre, I stumbled upon a narration that she told that she was raised in a harem, and that this was the place where she learned to dance, and that she escaped from this place. And I found 2 other dancers, also forgotten dancers, that who were working in Paris at around the same time, who had the same narration. The first one is Leyla Bedakan, who was born 1903 in Istanbul, so then Constantinople, and had a life between various nations, ethnical and cultural backgrounds. So she was half Kurdish and half Austrian, with a background also in Jewish family from Austria, and was living between Turkey and Egypt, Switzerland, Austria, and then from the 20s on Paris. The other one is Armen Ohanian, who was an Armenian dancer born in Armenia, which was then actually from Russian nationality, but today is a part of Azerbaijan. So Shamaka, the city where she was born, she lived in Tehran, so in Persia, and also then traveled to Turkey, Egypt, lived then in London, then also in Paris, and then moved in her later life in 1936, she moved to Mexico City. So actually they lived really lives between various nations, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, and various also languages. They were all fluent in a lot of languages. And yeah, so as we could find out that they are also forgotten, this is why we present them here today, and maybe we get a little bit closer to why.
Thanks so much. To include just our starting introduction round, unless if you wanted to, you're fine, right? Great. Okay. So I wanted to introduce two more speakers, Anna Wagner and Eike Wittrock, who were working. Yes, I'm keeping it all in the gallery view because we're trying to have a conversation. So if you want to make yourself visible, that's great. Who are working, did a project around another kind of forgotten dancer. So who they'll introduce, and also the project they did together. So Anna Wagner is working as dramaturg and program curator at the Artist House Monsunturm in Frankfurt-Main. And she studied theater studies together with Eike Wittrock in Berlin. And since she has entered the professional field of theater, she has been initiating various projects that try to twist perspectives on the theater as an institution. And Eike Wittrock is a dance historian, curator, and currently senior scientist at the Center for Gender Studies at the University for Music and Performing Arts in Graz. His research focuses on 19th and 20th century European dance, especially its iconographic sources, the politics of the archive, as well as the history of queer and exoticist performances in Germany.
And I'm just going to briefly sort of introduce the project that Anna and me did together, and that we spoke about also the last time. I'm going to just share my screen to show you the posters of this event. It's the Julius von Spiegel Zentrum, the Julius von Spiegel Center, which was an itinerant research center dedicated to the study of global modernisms in dance. And it was at the same time a simulation of an art center with a residency program, as well as a festival showing commissioned works, choreographies, talks, and films. And we did this project twice, in 2014 in Freiburg in southern Germany, and then a second time in 2016 in Berlin. We had invited a bunch of contemporary artists to work with a very specific forgotten aspect of German dance history, the exoticisms of that were at the core of modernism to us. And around this question, we utilized the term archive quite productively. We had established our own archive, so to speak, for this project, and had collected from different sources material in order to prove our historical point, to sort of present the material that there is at the core of modernism in Germany, sort of, this process of exotization happening. And this material then we handed over to young artists for them to critically engage with this material and speak about the challenges and sort of the things that were left out in contemporary dance aesthetics, especially in regard to othering certain bodies and practices in contemporary dance. And we had named this whole project after a forgotten dancer, Julius von Spiegel, who, as a gay, Jewish, and deaf dancer, allowed us to spell out many different forms of exclusion in German dance history. And he is a very productive figure because we maintained a very ambiguous relationship to him, because at the one hand, it allows us to look at different things that have been excluded from dance history, the appropriation of racial otherness, but also a connection to sexology and the history of sort of the queer movement in Germany, which I elaborated a little bit on the last time, but also somehow how these realms overlap at points and also produce specific racist effects. So it's an interesting point that this forgotten dance, or for it was very important to stretch that this forgotten dancer is not something to sort of rescue and put on a pedestal, but it's sort of complexities or sort of ambiguities were something very important for us to work through actually contemporary dance politics and aesthetics. Yeah, I think this is somehow what we were trying to talk about last time.
Okay, I'm muted. I was the one who insisted on everybody always mute the mic, and then I always forget to turn it on when I speak. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. I don't know if when we were having the sort of pre-discussion, of a very interesting question came up when I was talking to Anna and Eike, which I kind of want to use as a hinge to take us into the maybe more free-flowing discussion. And we talked about a sort of like, the time that passed between the Hans-Julius Spiegel Zentrum 2014 and 2016. And I remember from your presentation last time how you actually at that point already highlighted how you changed from 2014 to 2016 by critically evaluating what did we do in the 2014 version and how would we like to change or address something different, or maybe issues that came up in the process of 2014 differently. And then we came up, we started talking about, well, now 2020, what would be the questions now, or what is the, in terms of dealing with this material and dealing with these questions, because so many shifts of discourses and in the art world and also practices in the art world have happened since in the last 2 years. It seems like it had accelerated. So I don't know if you want to start off.
Yeah, probably I can add to this and briefly also describe the shift that you have mentioned that Eike couldn't elaborate yet. In 2014, we had invited 5 international artists, meaning not coming from a German context. Most of them even came from a non-European context, and we had invited them to develop projects, short performances on materials that they have had chosen out of our archive materials. And by doing so, we were wondering if we rewrite certain or mark these choreographers despite our project and our good intention as others, because we had intense discussion in which moment are non-European choreographers invited and allowed to present work in the European/German context, or when do they get access to this field, or even are invited to produce work and get access to the resources. So this was why we went more local in the 2016 edition of Spiegel Zentrum in Berlin. We had chosen a new body of material, a box that was labeled Exotic Dance in the one archive in Berlin, and had invited young artists, young dance makers from the Berlin dance scene, coming from various backgrounds. So in this sense, we went more local and were looking into the diverse perspectives and voices of the Berlin dance scene. And I have the feeling, coming to your question, that in 2020, so we were constantly wondering how we would develop the project. We were also asked by different institutions if we couldn't do the project, could not do an edition in their houses. And I have the feeling, as you mentioned, in the last years, the discourse developed. Fortunately, there are other voices, curators that are now heard or can start to emerge in the community. So I have the feeling that we would rather today give away our curatorial power or position to others. So that we would, for example, hand over the archive to curators, experts coming from different contexts, and tell them, so please continue. Yeah, what would you do with this material from a curatorial perspective, and who would you invite? So in this sense, we would not probably stop the project, but we would really step back. And yeah, I guess what is important and interesting in this project as well is that it was very process oriented. So we really invited the artists to spend about 3 weeks in our archive, so, or even 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depended on the edition. So there was really time to discuss and to contest certain perspectives. So we had intense struggles also from time to time with the artist about our position, about their position, about the danger to be boxed or put in a box also by being part of this kind of project.
What's interesting, and I think when Sarah and I'm Sarah, sure you want to jump in, but when we talked exactly about this, what we came to is sort of really looking more closely again at the questions of forgetting and remembering. Like, what do we forget, and how and why do we remember? And is remembering always the opposite of the forgetting, or what would be the, yeah, that's already a couple of questions, but yeah.
Yeah, probably to add one more thing, as a somebody really among us who was rooted in the practice of programmation and curating, for me also, I would probably also kind of change the project in the way that I have the feeling that dance history, which is super important, and especially like looking at the aspects who are excluded and forgotten, is kind of elitist in a certain way. So for me, a question is constantly how to mediate dance history to people who are coming probably from various contexts, who are not so familiar with what we call contemporary dance. Or so we even had the vision to give the project into a completely different context, in a context where other dance forms are practiced, a bit as what you have said with your project, this Münchner Tanzgeschichten, really to think about how could we integrate these dance forms that are practiced in the presence also into our writing of the dance history. Because at the moment, and this is also what we always said in Spiegelzentrum, we look into the German modern dance history and connect it to contemporary dance practice in Germany. So but the question is, what is part of this German contemporary dance at the moment, and what is not part, or yeah.
And just to maybe add, because I think what we ended up talking was maybe inventing a school, sort of changing it from a research center to making sort of a Julius von Spiegel school out of it, with whatever that means in terms of accessibility and like what learning means and all these things that Anna already mentioned.
I was just, if I may too, because help me with what I'm just thinking about is, I was just asking myself while I was listening, and maybe Harry directly to you, is, I mean, the word of exotism, is this still something that we can use as a notion, or is it something very old-fashioned, or do we all understand the same thing? If we talk about exotisieren, this is what we say in German. Yeah, I would just be interested. Help me out for a second. What is the process of exotism? What is taking place exactly when we do so?
Sure, of course you can use it, but the problem is what you do with that information, what you do with the word, and how do you create a much larger discourse and an entry point into a more complex and more messy ways of looking at identity politics, whether it's from the perspective of queering, ethnicity, cultural appropriation, a multitude of different themes if you want to explore. So exotic and exotification forms a kind of an important doorway, important portal. But I just also want to throw in the idea of nostalgia. During the process of remembering, it's very easy to get mesmerized with ideas of nostalgia and the good old days where things were much better. So I think it's really important to remove yourself and to add immense amount of objectivity to an already subjective field of study and field of inquiry. And I think this is where the rub is, and this is where the slippery slope is. And as an artist, as a dance historian myself, I still struggle with either how do you reify and deify this kind of information and this kind of amazing aesthetic world, which has been documented and presented, and how do you pull and extrapolate threads into a more contemporary critical ways of thinking and ways of representation. So it continues to be an ongoing struggle. But I just also want to say that we live in a highly racialized world right now, all over the world. And there is an immense amount of for all kinds of phobias, and in terms of queer sexuality, immense amount of transphobia taking place in the world today. So I think it's really important to encapsulate the complexity of using dance history as an important tool to talk about the beginnings of contemporaneity, and not to put dance history in a kind of museum artifact, but really acknowledging 20th century modern representation of history has already been messed up and already been really complex ways of looking at the world. And we're just sort of expanding on that complexity with really sophisticated new methodologies and new perspectives.
I don't know if anybody wants to say anything, or if I can jump in my other capacity as a research team member for NYOTA, because what you were just saying as in terms of nostalgia, I'm really, really thankful for that comment about remembering and trying to be really watchful of falling into the trap of nostalgia, because even when I look at Nyota Nyoka, for example, as a woman, you know, dancer of color in Europe, you know, who was at least, you know, half white and half not white, you know, what we know. And so there, and when I'm looking at this from, and my job or my perspective is to, you know, connect it also to contemporary practice and look at that kind of practice as research from today, and that sort of impulse to be like, oh, she's an ancestor, and you know, which can be dance ancestor of mine, maybe as a half white, half non-white dancer today who also draws an Indian dance. For, you know, threads that fine line of, you know, recovering a history that people like me have been sort of denied within the realm of looking at contemporary European dance history, or the history that, you know, led us to contemporary European dance. But it also, you know, you can easily fall in the trap of nostalgia and looking for something in her that may not be there. So that, so how do we remember, or what do we forget, or what are we searching for? So
yeah. And also, I also want to speak to, just if I may, Sarah and Sandra, also talk to ideas of authenticity. Who gets to represent what? And what are they representing? What is that representation already tinged with? All kinds of messiness in terms of their different layers of complexity. So when you talk about authenticity, I think you have to be really specific and just make sure that the audience you're speaking to is aware of that kind of larger than life discourse.
It's interesting because both those questions of authenticity and maybe nostalgic remembering remind me of something that you just talked about, Christina, the other time, in terms of, I think it was Armen Ohanian and her being remembered in the Armenian diaspora. And I thought that like was an interesting point of connection as well.
Yes, so actually both of them have been found again in diasporic movements. One in Turkish Kurdish, not diaspora, but in Turkey actually, and one in Canada by queer Armenian diaspora, but both of them nearly at the same time, so in the 2010s, very recently, and none of them tried to find like authentic recreation of what she was doing, or trying to find what would be an authentic Armenian, Kurdish, Persian, whatever dance. But actually they were more, maybe this is a kind of nostalgic way to get into it, drawing on their lives actually. So they were more looking on their trajectory, on this fact that they had been forgotten, and trying to do pieces on the lives of the two dancers, but not drawing not even trying to find out what would be authentic. So this is just a comment, not an answer really. But I was also, if I can go back to what Anna before said, because I was also thinking that actually there is not only the gap between what is presented on stages now or in modernity, but then there's even a gap between what is presented a lot and what is then entering into academia. So there is somehow two gaps there. Is also just a comment.
That's really I had a thought as well, and I wanna I'm super interested in the presentation question, obviously, as a dancer, as somebody who at least in the context of checkers is also involved with a kind of, curating and trying to choose and trying to think of formats of presentation. But I had a thought about the nostalgia bit, and I was like, I know that for me, the idea of nostalgia really resonates as a sore point, because it seems like it's such an impulse for somebody sort of trying to recover part of their own history, which feels like it has not had space or scope. But like from your archival practice, Franz Anton, does nostalgia play a role, or what kind of role might nostalgia play there, or how is that maybe different or similar?
Yeah, that's the point I was trying. Yeah, that struck me. Nostalgia and authentication. We have. I mean, the more I'm working in archives, or I have been working, and I'm still working, the more I take, let's say, I notice that the very notion of archive is changing a lot, because in a let's say on a basic level, the archive is always nostalgic. It's always what the past left us. It's the truth, and we can have it very neat and smug and übersichtlich, so practical. However, as Hardy also says in the interocularity, so the notion of enlarging the notion of archive, and also the holdings of an archive, is something that's very important, because we all know that archival representation, or people or events or artifacts represented in archives, have very much to do with the power of the persons in the time, during the time of their lives, of the Bestandsbildner. And so the promise of truth that the archive somehow always holds is also slippery, and it's also very, let's say, situated. So that the distinction that start, as far as I can see, that started in the early 2000s with Diana Taylor's distinction between the archive and the repertoire. The archive is more the Western document, written, language-based, let's say, form of remembering, and the repertoire is, let's say, oral tradition. But of course, 20 years after that theorization, we have, I think, reached a point where, as Robert Reed Farr calls it, we need critical archive studies, in the sense that not only who is remembered or forgotten in dance history, but also what kind of artifacts, what kind of documents, what kind of testimonies are allowed to enter the archive. And as you say, Hari, that looking at situations in a much broader sense, taking into consideration, all kinds of cultural practice, more social practice, maybe also than just historical or aesthetic practice, is something that I think is necessary, and it's also being constructed. That's why probably some of the curatorial projects that are still that have been or had been in the past still, let's say, shrouded in the archival notion of what's in the archive is the truth, have a feeling of we are missing something. We are missing a point, I mean.
I know Nicole wants to add something to this. Yes.
Yeah, do you hear me? Yes. So I think it's very, very necessary to rethink archives and types of archives, also regarding the colonization of time. So because it's really interesting who collects what at what, in which context, and how is the archive organized. So and also we have a lot of blind spots in so-called dance archives, and these have to do also with the colonization of time and this matrix, and and what is a historical event and when. So so this is a more a common and an open question. But for me, for example, I have now I worked in two very different contexts on archives. First, when I started to work at the University of Salzburg, we had the Dera de Moroda Dance Archives. And I was very intrigued and fascinated, so multifaceted documents from different contexts, social dances, concert dances, and so on. And I somehow had a blind spot because in that time, I never critically reflected the biography of the collector. So, and this is, of course, or I also avoided this critical analysis of this biography because I somehow knew that Dera de Moroda was working in the Third Reich for authorities and so on. So it's a very complex story, but somehow, it was sort of when I started, I tried to, and we had to do a lot of research and work, and it's still done. But then also for the Nyote Nyoka project, a completely different archive, but from the same time. And now I'm obsessed with her biography, because somehow it's, I don't know why, but I think I hope I might come to an interweaving of both, because there is a sort of obsession to find out who this person or artist was, analyzing her oeuvre, her biography, and so on, to understand the work. But I think it's not meant to be understood like I think it should be or could be understood. There is a constant struggle, and Harry, you also mentioned the struggle, but it's not my struggle. I think it's a struggle that is there in the discourse of dance historiography, in a sort of in our context.
I think Anna wanted to add on here, right?
Yeah, I guess we should also, as a theater practitioner, I guess it's important also to pay attention on what happens if we shift from one context to the other, if we move from academia or the archive into the context of art production. And it's probably a bit just very anecdotic, but it's interesting that in the first edition of Spiegelzentrum, one of our guests who gave input lectures and other guests, they all thought that Spiegel is a fake. So because it's such a complex biography, and I guess this is very important to say, because, or I even don't know what to do with that, because there was a certain fashion in dance or performance production where these fake biographies were invented to show certain things. But I guess, yeah, it was, and I just wanted to mention this in relation to the truth. I had the feeling that the theater context somehow weakened the truth and the complexity a bit, for sure. Then we, just to share this experience.
It's a really, really interesting point that I have something to add on about Nyota. But first, I wanted to give Harry, ask Harry about if you want to add something, concluding remark for you.
I mean, it's nothing profound actually, but it's just that I just want to say that talk about ideas of privilege and entitlement, that it's for every person privileged enough to be in the archive, there's so many individuals who have not made it there. So to talk about the social and really thoughtful and meaningful ways, who is left out in those archives, who could have made it, and how do we find out information about them? So to create a much more cohesive and more democratic methodology.
Thank you so much, Harry. I know that you will be leaving us in just a moment because you have to, but we will continue the discussion. So I guess if anybody has a direct question to you, would this still be a moment? Anyone? I think that's fine. Great. In which case, thank you so much for being with us, and and we will continue our conversation, if that's okay. Great. It was really interesting, Anna, what you said about the truth, and you mentioned the sort of biographies, also because at that time there was this sort of maybe even a convention to make a very mysterious biography for an artist, or that there were a lot of artists who did that, who created mystery around their persona. And that definitely for me, looking at trying to look at and analyze the authorial position of Nyota and Joka is one of the very interesting questions. It's like, what do you do with the kind of constructed narratives that make a mystery out of specifically the origin and the biography? And then from today's, like if I'm trying to look at it from today's sort of political perspective of a dancer of color, and also the critique of obviously a notion of authenticity that's there, but also looking at questions of cultural appropriation that become important now. How do you even talk about cultural appropriation if you don't know the biography of the dancer, right? Like what, then how do you have to shift thinking about this? And is this even, like, can I even translate that question into the past? And is it even fair to do so if the concerns of the dancers in the past were completely different ones? And of course I have to ask that question. I'm not saying I shouldn't ask that question, but that's what, yeah, what you said about the fact that people thought that even Julius Hans Spiegel was a fake, quote unquote, reminded me of that. Yeah. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to add. If not, we do have a question from the audience already. So unless there's something urgent that somebody from the panel wants to add now.
No, I would like to follow up a bit on what you said.
Yeah.
Problematizing the notion of archive, because of course we have to know more in a more concrete or more exact way what we are looking for in the archives. But at the same time, the entire notion of historiography, of history writing, is also maybe not neutral. And if we think that historic facts need to be reconstructed based on certain sources, etc., to say this is how history was, be it democratic or nationalistic or whatever, we still stay in a realm where we are based on a certain factuality. But part of history and part of the lived experience of people, populations, artists, etc., in history might be just the contrary. It might not be concerned with let's be true, faithful, etc., but let's mystify ourselves. Let's make up things. Let's go into fiction rather than into factuality. And that's something, you know, Robert Reed Farts, I'm sorry to come back to him. I'm just reading his book. He says, let's resisting at every turn the tyrannies of philosophy and sociology, not so much historiography, but this is something we might add. So being maybe more aware of the very paradigms that that we are still, let's say, engaged in or caught in. If I could add, because I had a thought that now actually I've been wanting to share, but now it's actually, it sort of adds on to what Franz Kramer was saying, that I've been now working a lot with sort of minoritarian archives from the German gay and lesbian movement and from the 70s. And there, this sort of a very specific pragmatic notion of historiography appeared, because the 1970s gay movement, especially the male gay movement, they collected historic material in order to sort of be activists. It was part of their activist strategy to make up their own archive. And I'm very sort of inspired also to making these sort of very politicized notion obvious, like how, I mean, in the Julius Hans Spiegel Zentrum sort of was a different direction to have sort of a critical direction in this, but to make actually the implicit politics of the archive, to make them apparent and make them useful and sort of do something with them. Sort of the question, what do you do with history? Not just doing history, but actually being quite open with what you want to do with history.
if I may add on here, because you were just with the Julius Hans Spiegel Center, and so there's a question that actually is for Anna, for both of you, Anna and Eike, and I was asked to read it out because they can't connect to the microphone. So the question was about how, with the going back to nostalgia, and how you with the Julius Hans Spiegel Center dealt with the balance of like nostalgia in curation, or dealt with the idea of nostalgia and curation. Anna.
We commissioned all new works, so that was like one thing that we, and we didn't do any reconstruction. We left it quite open how people used the material. So we went through historic material with them, and there was different modalities approaching the historic material, more of like some were really like reacting violently to the history, trying to sort of make a ritual that sort of does away with history. Others were aiming at something that was more of a reconstruction. Some were doing like a camp version of history. Some were doing like a deconstructive performance of history. So there was a lot of different modalities, of which nostalgia also could be one. There was, for instance, I mean, maybe like Nasera Belaza was invited, a choreographer from Algeria, who sort of really emphatically sort of used the material of Mary Wickman, whereas we were like, oh no, that's like super dangerous, like she's so problematic, she's a Nazi, yada yada yada. She's like, no, it's like, it's the same what I'm doing. I'm like reusing the sort of this energetic thing, and it's like, and who are we then to like impose our critical position on Mary Wickman from a German context, on a choreographer who's like, no, I'm actually really interested to put myself in the genealogy of Mary Wickman and of her sort of conception of how dance is.
But I guess it's important really to mention that there were no attempts to reconstruct. It was all were like, as Eike said, new works. And I guess it was very interesting because a lot of the works kind of linked the economies of dance production of nowadays with the economies of dance production of the 1920s, for example, or the use of the gaze or of certain performers. So I guess for example, Tümay Kilonise, one artist who was part of the archive, she used her experience in the archive to create another show afterwards, which is called Danseuse, and is still very much presented when the theaters are open. And she's like kind of looking into the position of a female dancers in the 1920s, 1930s, or what it means as a woman to be an artist and to be a soloist and to produce work and to stand for your own work and to be like be empowered by this also in a certain way. So I guess, yeah, that are different aspects. And I guess we even initiated the project because we wanted to go against this non-critical reconstruction of work that was, for example, in a German context, very much supported by the German Cultural Fund that initiated a project called Tanzfonds Erbe, dance or Fund for Dance Heritage, or and our project was supported by this initiative also.
But but we developed it very specifically as a critique, actually, of the application. So that they had this call for participation, and we had a very sort of direct reaction to it, that we felt that it was making the sort of monolith of German dance history, and we really wanted to break open how to approach dance history, to open up the ways people could engage with dance history. Yeah, and it was really like against going a specific sort of nationalist dance heritage writing that happened.
I know there's another question or multiple questions from Anurima. I don't know if you want to turn on your mic or camera if you want, or only mic. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, I can't turn on my video because of my internet connection not being very good, but I hope you can all hear me on the mic. Very, very happy to listen to these ideas. It's very exciting to have this conversation on dance history. So I had a couple of questions and would welcome your thoughts, since you've been the people have been really paying attention to these questions of archive and so on. I've been very curious in reading the dance history literature, where we often hear admonitions against nostalgia, but it makes me wonder, is nostalgia the only stance towards the past? When we're remembering, are there not other forms of remembering other than nostalgia, and can we mobilize those? Or are there other modes actually that are relevant when it comes to the archive? Might there be a form of productive nostalgia then? And then what are we doing in the archive if not actually harnessing some form of desire for recovery, whether we call it nostalgia or not? And the second question related to that is actually about this idea of appropriation versus authenticity. How are we appropriating anything unless there is an authentic? So again, can there not be a productive acknowledgement of what Spivak had so many years ago called strategic essentialism, or just an acknowledgement of originality that resides with a thing or a person? I'm thinking here, I'm sorry that Hari had to go, because I'm thinking here of debates on caste in the dance world that have just been surfacing in the Indian context. And the whole question of who is qualified to represent caste oppressed histories. And there's a move to say, of course, that it should be the people who have been denied that privilege of self-representation. So the question of, I think, authenticity extends to this question of appropriation, because yeah, that's just been a burning question as I've been doing my own dance history research, that how can we acknowledge the originality, the authenticity, frankly, of certain practices, you know, because what are we then talking about when we talk about appropriation? Okay, thank you very much.
Who wants to take?
I'm sorry if I'm first. Thank you. These are very very important points, and I'm probably I wouldn't be able. I don't think I'm really able to answer, but I'm totally with you in when you're saying that. Well, if once we are in the archive, something is happening. There is a sensual or sensory experience, and there is let's say history is kind of, we are engaged with history somehow. And so my reserves were not so much about saying, well, there's no history in the archive, or we cannot find it there. It's just the way how we engage with it and how we relate it, and what kind of stories we try to distill. So it's not necessarily about nostalgia and saying, oh, you know, it was, the past was better than the present. In fact, very often, and I think in a way also at least our project, and we're doing in Salzburg, is more, it's how to say, it's rejecting nostalgia and saying, so what, you know, what through all these collections that the artist herself let's say put together, but also other institutional archives, institutional collections, etc., etc. As Hari said, the multiple stock of records and documents. It's more like a challenge to use them in a productive way, which is not, maybe it's maybe it's nostalgic in the sense, as Nicole said, we are so curious, who was she actually? How can it be that Nyota Nyoka, for all the prominence she had in her time and all the material she bequeathed to us, that there's still so much unclear, so much veiled, so much spectral, so many spectral elements. That's vexing. So as a historiographer, it's not nostalgic. It's really, it's like an avid. You're becoming avid. You want to find the ultimate source in order to unveil the mysteries. So that's a very there's a lot of passion also in archival research. Is the question of authentic, maybe just to finish, is of course, I mean, if we reject authenticity, then where it's a constant, let's say, a spiraling process of negativity. So where would be the positive part? Where is the origin, or where is the thing we can accept or relate to? That's I don't have an answer, but it's a poignant question, at least.
Maybe just to add to the first question, Anurima, thank you for formulating these. I've been very inspired by the queer historiographic approaches that sort of make these affects in the archive quite explicit, like the one I mentioned before, where it's like sort of using or making archives to sort of make a critical stand, which was a really like prominent position in the 70s and 80s, and then something more complex like Sedgwick, who articulated this reparative criticism to sort of also allow yourself to be in love with what you're doing, and sort of using historic material to complete certain things that are maybe broken in certain sort of minoritarian subjectivities, but also to make the melancholia. I think it's another sort of notion than nostalgia, and it's especially again from minoritarian archives where a lot of the material is inevitably lost and cannot be reconstructed because it just escaped for whatever reason, sort of the state, the stately vision, and sort of to make use of sort of the melancholic approach to history, to mourn or to like be obsessed with something that is inevitably lost somehow, and to sort of then make a political stance out of this connection. I'm very inspired by these different ways in queer historiography to make explicit the affects involved in the work of the historiographer and sort of in the making of the archive, and then politicizing these affects, basically making very specific use of these different affects that travel in the archive, travel between the historian and the archive material. And that's what I've sort of am obsessed with, is also this really ambiguous relationship with these people that I encounter in the archive, who are all quite problematic from today's perspective. But there is something also that it's intriguing to be able to rewrite certain positionalities into dance history that have not been there. With Judith Hans Spiegel, he was performing in Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexology, this legendary place in the 1920s, who invented the word transvestite, and sort of really opened up a discourse of different gender embodiments and sort of non-binary sexualities. And you could then again use Spiegel as the only sort of historically recorded performer, having performed in this institute a dance where he switches between gender roles in the same dance, basically as the introduction of a trans discourse into dance history, which is also in the sort of Western historiography completely absent, but also then sort of really bringing in, and it's again like another historiographic challenge. We don't really know what pronouns or gender identity Spiegel had. I mean, I assume he was a cis male, but in this, like these examples also open up at least a different thinking of a gendered embodiment in that era. And so I'm really like, I'm obsessed with this aspect, but then of course I'm disgusted by the photographies where we see him doing blackface with tourists and in Italy, where they're having like parties and they're using the materials, the masks that he had from Indonesia, and he's just playing around with other tourists, and they're blackfacing themselves and making sort of a sort of parody of a ritual. So you really have this very ambiguous material that that the complex, it's also, I mean, that really make obvious the complexities of history, especially in the locality where we are in Germany.
That's maybe one aspect that might add to, or that might lead to an answer to the question, what's authentic? Probably it's not the easy things or the clear work or the clear-cut original, but it's the conundrums and the distortions and the embarrassing things that make historic fact an authentic fact, maybe, or at least add to the authenticity.
Great. I'm wondering if there's any other questions, maybe from the audience or from anyone from the panel. Or from us. No. Actually then I will add on just a little moment. Thank you for reminding me, Eike, of this of melancholia, because that's actually I hadn't connected it to this inquiry, and I think I must look at that in relation to Nyota. So thanks for that impulse. I'm very yeah, want to acknowledge that right now, because yeah, my mind is kind of exploding right now with that connection, so I can't put it in words yet, but something really resonated there for me.
I mean, yeah, melancholy is one of the main issues, I think, that's raised when it comes to dance remembrance, to dance archiving, because dance is ever vanishing and immaterial, etc. So it's all melancholic. I remember reading a book, I don't even exactly remember, but anyway, it was on musicology, and it contested the common interpretation of one of the very first European manuals of archiving or writing dance, at least, which is a way of archiving somehow, by Corey. Help me, I'm confused now because of the English. The 1599 treatise, Orchisographie, right?
Arbaud.
Anyway. Huh?
Arbaud?
Arbaud, right.
Mm.
And the author said, well, it's not so much about the sadness of losing dances, but it's more because dance practices at that time were very closely linked to warfare. And so certain rhythms could, if you understood the rhythm played in music or in march by the enemy, you could foresee somehow his maneuvers and his strategies. There was a strategic advantage to remember and to know the dances, not so much an aesthetic problem. So coming to maybe more to the present times, maybe it's more the activist part. Remembering or not remembering, forgetting or not forgetting, has very much to do with how to position yourself and how to define your role or your the confines of your life or life possibility or living possibilities. And that's of course all the more important the further you are, let's say, or the less you are connected to whatever the mainstream is. And in order to protect and construct your own history in some kind of marginal situation, melancholia is not maybe it's not melancholia, it's more activism or activation. That's very associative, I'm not sure, but thank you.
If I may add, just as a, if I could just offer another thought in the range of other possibilities in terms of a stance, nostalgia, melancholy, also this activation notion. As a dance detective, I'm always also driven by pleasure of finding that thing that actually, you know, is like gold in the case of whatever project I'm pursuing. So what about curiosity and pleasure? Like a curiosity about the past. Does that always have to be nostalgia again? Maybe it's something else. Maybe there are other kinds of critical postures about recollection. I guess that's the impulse behind my question. And can nostalgia itself be recuperated as a productive move? So I just wanted to just offer those thoughts in the mix.
Well, it's as I said, it's a very passionate thing to be in the archive, at least for me, and it's in trying to, you know, to dig deeper and deeper and to understand. And I think Berenike, we share this kind of fascination with the kind of never-ending research, as you say. You know, where will we find the huge diamond or the huge hump of gold? So that's, but in a way, I think that's something we can indulge in, but at the same time, I have come to the point, let's say, I wouldn't even be able to generalize on that. I have come to the point where I keep asking myself more and more questions on how, you know, how this self-indulgence in the archival research, where does it lead me, and what are the possible results that go beyond my own self-indulgence, let's say. So that's something, yeah, I'm still thinking about, so I'm not quite sure. But the passion is there, but the doubts are there at the same time. Let's call it that, for me.
Eike, did you have something, or?
It's always the same two guys now answering. That's to hold back maybe. But I mean, I can just, like, from this queer historiographic perspective, there's like, again, there's also like, I mean, pleasure and even sexual pleasure being articulated. Elizabeth Freeman talks a lot about what she calls bottom historiography, where it's really like making yourself receptive as a historian to be sort of, yeah, to let other bodies come into yourself. So it's a really like sexualized version of putting your own positionality. I mean, that it's, we could talk about the, yeah, anyway, but like putting yourself into question, or like having your own identity open to other positions from the past, and other, especially physical embodiments from the past. So she makes this point in order to say, like, not to discard previous positions within the history of like queer movement. Yeah, it's and another one is to sort of to create communities across the past. So that's another one, sort of where you search for maybe counterparts, or also what Sandra, what you said, sort of looking for your for people of your tribe in the past, and really creating a community across history. Which is another very sort of, yeah, not pleasure, but like a sort of positively driven affect to create history and for searching for something in the past. And I think it's been articulated by like Foucault and Roland Barthes. They're really like their affects when they're in the archives, how specific images or specific formulations really create a pleasure, a physical sensation within them. And what I like about that is that they really turn this into sort of a critical position. And I think it's something that all of us who work in the archives hopefully have encountered, this sort of eureka moment, but also like this excitement where he's like, there's something speaking in this material to me in a way. Like that's what happened to me in the dance archives when I saw certain queer formulations where it really was like tickled. I was like, I didn't know that this existed. I didn't know that these physical articulations that I recognize and that speak to me in a very specific way, that they existed. And they really, like, these were really like pleasurable, incredibly moving moments in the archives.
Yeah, I can totally identify with these pleasures being in the archive. And I also wanted maybe to bring in one thought. This is that I really believe it is very important to perform or reenact memories, because this is a bit for me beyond this memory, remembering, forgetting. Of course, it's but this performing, reenacting memory. It is for me sort of going with and at the same time against the process of canonization. Because on the one hand, yes, we have to really analyze the canon to understand how it was implemented, under which circumstances, etc. But then also performing dissonant, alternative, other memories, and this refers also to this queering as a method is important in this process, and that's why we also try to really perform memories in different ways and reenact memories in different ways and in different formats, writing, dancing, doing performative installations, maybe, we don't know yet, but this is important, I think, for our project with the different perspectives we have.
It's interesting for me. I mean, maybe that's why I'm coming to this with the practice as research sort of perspective more than with the, I mean, I'm loving getting to know the work in the archive, but it's newer to me than other forms of research. So I'm very much a novice in this compared to this methodology. But the pleasure of kind of, and I'm not really thinking about reconstruction in this way. I'm trying to physically figure out what the person we are researching did. Now, be it with Nyota's, some of her notation, or in another project, which I did with the Postnatal Collective, where we looked at Maud Allen. There is something obviously in the, like you say, on some level, embodiment of memories, and also, I mean, it's in a sense, it feels like memory and the archival material, like even my memory as a performer, come into dialogue at that moment in a very specific way, which is very productive and also very pleasurable. However, with Maud Allen, I could identify with what you were saying, Eike, in the sense of like, she was super problematic, but also, you know, there is a temptation of looking at her as a kind of, you know, queer ancestor or predecessor of the past, you know, but in a very problematic way. So this sort of ambivalence became very, very clear, because she was also very Orientalist, you know, kind of kicked off the Salome craze, and yeah, so that's it's an interesting moment of like discovery, which is pleasurable, but then also sort of discovery of the dark sides of it, or the problematic sides of it, or the which have yeah, a totally different affective response. So yeah. Just trying to see if there are any other questions. No, I think there's at the moment no other questions from the audience that I can see. I don't know, anybody from the panel? Or I think our questions that we had also talked about before, Sarah, have in most ways been touched upon already, in even if obliquely. And we've gone a lot longer than we had planned. So I think this attests to the fact that it was actually a really productive and interesting discussion, at least in my mind. So I'm wondering if this is a moment to wrap up or ask for final comments, if there want to be any.
Well,
sorry.
Sorry, maybe, I don't know a final comment, but I'm with you in the sense that I think it's very inspiring. The notion of nostalgia, maybe less than melancholia. To come back to that, that's something that really strikes me. To come back to the melancholia question, which is very often tied to dance, but rarely to dance historiography. So that's something really to take stock of. Yeah, and the physical engagement with history. So I like the term bottom historiography. I've come across the spectral historiography, speaking with the dead and resurrecting the dead, but that's a different way. Eating dust is a different way than being penetrated by history. So that's something that I quite like.
Yeah,
so I was just, sorry, Eike, yeah.
No, I just wanted to give the sort of the other author. So Elizabeth Freeman is the bottom historiography author, and Heather Love is the one who's been writing on melancholia. It's I really recommend her work.
I was really just, by following your beautiful thoughts that you all elaborated, I was just thinking about whether at the beginning, Anna and Eike, we've been asking you, would there be, what kind of new challenge would there be for third, fourth edition to present and to get in touch with the audience? By looking around in the crowd, and maybe with this I hand over to you, Monica, because I was just, but don't ask me why this popped up in my mind. I was thinking whether we could benefit and in what way, but I'm always thinking of how to get an idea over to an audience. How do we communicate? That's my perspective. Whether archiving, but I think we should in a way drop that word or overcome it. How we archive spirituality, and maybe we can take or pick point from spirituality, how we use it, because are there points that we can use, because spirituality always works with the others, without getting in touch, without a dear relationship to others. This might not be working, but I don't know whether this is something that goes in your direction, Monica. You just wrote us, you wanted to add something. Hi there.
Oh, hi, Sarah. Hello, Sandra. Hi, everyone. Such a lovely, very lovely panel tonight. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing in the idea of spirituality. I just would like to add to the idea of performing memories, because, you know, I've been dealing with traditional hula from Hawaii for now many, many years. And the tradition of hula actually, as a practice to go beyond colonialism, you know, as a drive of the Hawaiian people to engage beyond being superimpositioned by Western culture through writing, actually bringing their culture to a sort of extinction because they had a performed memory of history. And it was their institution actually to memorize history. And there are always all the different facets we talked about, melancholy, maybe sort of nostalgia. I think it's a sort of nostalgia, I think, is something, how do you reminiscent, or how do you say, how to reminiscent? You're reminiscing, no, you are reminiscing about the past, and there's a play with it. It's, you know, it's so multifaceted how this play with reminiscence happens in actually the tradition of performing history. And I just would like to add, because it's an almost forgotten tradition of dance, because it's non-European and if it's colonized and it's actually at the margin, and they try to bring it actually to visibility also in the world scope of dance. And actually there was one large performance group invited to Germany. I forgot her name. She's a very famous dancer in Germany, to Essen, and they performed there. And I just would like to, just because we're talking about archives, and it's really a very Western notion also how to deal with history, and because we have this already in terms of writing and the force of the writing, or, you know, but of course documents and artifacts that are archived. So I just want to say there is a tradition, a very rich tradition of performing history. Just want to add this, just in terms of intercultural, widen the scope. And this, of course, spirituality. Whoa, Sarah, big topic there. I would need to think about it. Because spirituality and archives, interesting. Wow, I think I would have to think about it and to see whether maybe to talk about it, and how this can be a topic of discussion actually, and also what in fact is spirituality, what do we perceive as such, and what do we want to find when we look at this topic. So oh, that's a huge topic. Thank you, Sarah. I think at the moment there is a lot of nostalgia there too when thinking of spirituality. What are we looking actually? Is spirituality actually the last resort of originality, maybe? And is there a particular source that we access when we get into spirituality? And is it actually, is there a way to archive it? So I will think about it. It's a beautiful question. Thank you. Thank you for having me just speak for a moment.
Thank you. Sorry, Monica, but definitely Sandra and Ari, we put that on our list because, and for sure, this is something that we should share when we all be able to be in one room, I guess, to then get to into another dimension altogether. Well, yes, Sandra, yeah.
Might actually the perfect way to segue into, you know, a preview of part 3 in order to wrap this up, because actually we are planning to meet in person in July, if and when Corona lets us. Particularly this, of course, might be an issue for Hari, who has the furthest to travel. But yes, so the plan would be to meet in July, and I know we haven't updated you yet, Monica, but Monica has last year collaborated with us on an installation, because we actually go way back, and we met in Hawaii, and for a short while studied from the same Kumuhula. And we did an installation around how that sort of changed each of our perspectives on dance and on kind of anti-colonial activism and on dance history in different ways. And the plan would be to actually have an extended version of, or a modified version, or of something, revisiting that in an extended way, right back to back with the Forgotten Dancers, Forgotten Archives. So in the same sort of week in July. So in that sense, this was a perfect tie over to bring it together, because we're hoping to have those, if everything goes well, to have those 2 events back to back in July.
Okay. So I also would like to say thank you, big up to all of you, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the evening. And this was another edition of something Checkers presented, and I hope this was also another moving intervention from our side. So all the best to all of you. And like I said, the next time we appreciate, please stay in touch with that. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks everyone for joining and for speaking, for joining the discussion. Thanks to all the panelists. The great questions.